Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from Rao's IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 10th May 2020. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start our discussion. Now this article on page number 6 talks about the increased borrowing of the government due to the coronavirus outbreak. Now in this background you should be knowing that the Union Budget 2020 and 21 had targeted the fiscal deficit of the government at 3.5% of the GDP. And in absolute terms, this value comes around rupees 7.8 lakh crores. However, due to the outbreak of virus, it has led to large-scale decline in the revenue receipts for the government. And at the same time, there is a need to announce higher financial package to provide fiscal stimulus measures. So taking all these factors into account, the government has decided to increase the borrowing limit for the year 2020 and 21 by almost 50% to rupees 12 lakh crore. And according to some estimates, the fiscal deficit could rise to about 5.6% of India's GDP. So in this background, in this article, what we will do is that we will try and learn about the major sources of borrowings for the center and what has been the trend in past 5 years of all these sources of borrowing for the center. And this can be a very important aspect for us from the preliminary examination point of view under the topic economic development. So now from the preliminary examination point of view, it is very important for us to know about the important sources of borrowing for the central government. And these include the treasury bills, the dated securities, ways and means advances, sovereign gold bonds, bank recapitalization bonds, and the securities which are issued against the National Small Savings Fund. So let us learn about these important instruments which are used by the central government for its borrowing. First is the treasury bill, and it is an instrument to raise short-term loans. And second important thing that should be noted is that they are issued in 3 tenors or maturity periods, that is 91 days, 182 days and 364 days. And these treasury bills are zero coupon securities and the government pays no interest on them. However, they are issued at a discount and they are redeemed at the face value at maturity period. Now in the prelims examination of 2018, a question was asked related to the treasury bill. So accordingly, questions can also be asked related to the other instruments also. Now what is the meaning of issuing the treasury bill at a discount and redeeming at the face value? So for example, a 91-day treasury bill of rupees 100 may be issued at rupees 98. So in this case, rupees 100 is the face value and the rupees 98 is the issuing amount. So this means that they are issued at a discount of rupees 2 and would be redeemed at the face value of rupees 100. So in this case, the return to the investor is the difference between the maturity value and the issue price. And in this case, it turns out to be rupees 2. So this means that they are issued at a discounted rate and they are redeemed at a face value. Again, regarding the dated securities, you should note that these are used for long-term loans. So the treasury bills are used to raise short-term loans while the dated securities are used for raising the long-term loans. And regarding the dated securities, the central government issues both the treasury bills and bonds or dated securities. However, the state governments issue only bonds or dated securities, and these are called the state development loans. So this is a very important difference for us from the exam point of view. And what we learned is that the state governments do not issue treasury bills. And this particular aspect was also asked in the prelims examination of 2018. Now regarding these government securities, these carry practically no risk of default, and that is why they are called as risk-free gilt-edged instruments. Again, there are ways and means advances, and these are used for borrowings from the Reserve Bank of India to meet immediate cash requirements, and these requirements can arise due to temporary mismatches in the receipts and the expenditure. Again, there are sovereign gold bonds, and these are those government securities which are dominated in terms of gold. And regarding the bank recapitalization bonds, these are issued by the government to raise loans for undertaking the recapitalization of public sector banks. Now, besides these, there is another important instrument which is known as securities, which are issued against the National Small Savings Fund. And the money which is collected under the various small saving schemes like the post office deposits, national saving certificates, etc., is deposited under this National Small Saving Fund, and it is maintained as a part of the public account of India. So, this is another important fact that needs to be remembered. Now, a certain percentage of these funds under the National Small Savings Funds is used to invest in the special government securities, and hence these are also considered to be the government's borrowings. So, after understanding these important instruments, let us look at the trends in the government's borrowings. Now, according to this graph, if we exclude the market borrowings of the central government, we find that the securities which are issued against the small savings, or the securities which are issued against the National Small Savings Fund, are the highest source of revenue for the central government. And as you can see in this graph, the securities which are issued against the small savings account for the highest source of revenue for the central government in the last 3 to 4 years. So in the past 3 to 4 years, the securities which are issued against the small savings account for the highest source of revenue for the central government. And you can see this clearly in this graph that the securities issued against the small savings account for the highest source for the central government. So these are few important facts, and with this, let's take up the next article now. Now, this article on page number 12 is related to the distress and the misery which is being faced by the migrant laborers due to the current economic lockdown which has been imposed in the background of COVID-19 outbreak. And such distress has raised the question about the welfare of the migrant laborers and also the lack of legal protection for their rights. So, such a situation of the migrant laborers has drawn the attention to a very important legislation which is dedicated to the welfare of migrant workers, and it is known as the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act of 1979. However, this Interstate Migrant Workmen Act of 1979 has been proposed to be subsumed under the new Labor Code. So, in this background, some activists have questioned this move of the government of including this Act of 1979 into the proposed Labor Code. And this can be an important aspect for us from General Studies paper 3 under the topic Economic Development. So, first, let us look at the key aspects and provisions of the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act of 1979. And after this, let us look at what are the proposed amendments in the labor laws and what are the issues surrounding them. So now this Interstate Migrant Workmen Regulation of Employment and Condition of Service Act 1979 seeks to regulate the employment of interstate migrants and their conditions of service. Second, it is applicable to every establishment that employs 5 or more migrant workmen from other states. Again, the employers and the contractors are prohibited from employing the interstate workmen without a certificate of registration from the relevant authority. Further, it creates a system of accountability and helps in formalization, and also helps the government keep track of the number of workers which are employed in different parts of India. Further, it provides a legal basis for regulating the condition of service of these migrant workers. And in this background, the employers and contractors have to provide the terms and conditions of work, including the remuneration which is payable, the hours of work which are required by these workers, and also fixation of wages and other essential amenities. Again, the wage rates, holidays, hours of work, and other conditions of service of an interstate migrant workman shall be the same as those extended to other workmen in the same establishment if the nature of work is similar. So, this means that the kind of remuneration, the holidays, and hours of work should only be dependent upon the nature of work and should not be dependent upon the status of migration. Further, it has the provision of payment of a displacement allowance and a yearly allowance to interstate migrant workers. So, all these aspects highlight that the Act of 1979 provides certain safeguards to the interstate migrant workmen. However, we note that there is lack of serious implementation of such an important law, and this is visible in the distress which is being faced by the migrant laborers across India. And this also highlights the issue of the rights of the migrant workers being ignored. Now, we already know that this existing law, which deals with the rights of the migrant workers, has not been implemented properly. And even after that, the government, in its efforts towards consolidating and reforming the labor law, has introduced a bill called the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2019. And this proposed law seeks to repeal 13 such important acts, which include the Factories Act, the Mines Act, Dock Workers Act, and the Interstate Migrant Workmen Act. And in this background, the activists fear that specific safeguards given to the migrant workers might be lost as a result of such a consolidation which is being done by the Parliament of India. And the proposed code contains provisions similar to the 1979 Act regarding the registration of establishment, licensing of contractors, and inclusion of terms and conditions on the hours of work, wages, and amenities. Further, both the old Act and the proposed code envisage the payment of a displacement allowance and a journey allowance to the interstate migrant workers. Further, this bill includes the migrant laborers in the definition of the contract labor. And again, the code has a chapter on contract labor and interstate migrant workers. Now, what are the issues that have been raised regarding the consolidation of all the labor laws into one law? So, the Parliamentary Standing Committee has recommended that the provisions relating to the migrant workers should be covered in a separate chapter in this consolidated law, that is, under the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code of 2019. So, simply this committee has recommended that there should be a separate chapter dealing with the issues of interstate migrant workers. Further, there are some labor unions which feel that preserving the separate law related to the interstate migrant workers and enforcing it well is a better option than consolidating it under a larger labor code. So these labor unions want that this separate law related to the interstate migrant workers should continue, and such an act should not be consolidated under the overarching labor law. And one of the suggestions for improving the situation is that there should be special provisions for the migrant workers, and such a provision should be added in the labor code. And such a move has been done by the state government of Kerala, which should be emulated by the central government also. So these were few provisions of the Interstate Migrant Workers Act 1979, and again the proposed Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code of 2019. And in this regard, we have seen some of the issues which have been raised by the labor unions and the Parliamentary Standing Committee. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 12 draws the attention towards the new fund which has been created, known as the PM CARES Fund. And this new fund has been created to tackle the distress situation which has been posed by the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this background, a comparison is often drawn between the PM CARES Fund and the PM's National Relief Fund. So let us look at both these funds comparatively, and also let us look at some of the issues that have been raised or some of the concerns regarding the PM CARES Fund. So some of the factual information related to the PM CARES Fund can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view in the topics economic development. And also the comparison between the PM CARES Fund and the PM's National Relief Fund will be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And some of the concerns that have been raised regarding the PM CARES Fund can be important for us from the mains examination point of view under the topic economic development. So let us look at some of these aspects one by one. So now first let us look at who contributes to this PM CARES Fund. So the initial guideline states that the fund receives voluntary contributions from individuals and organizations, and it does not get any budgetary support. That means that it is not funded by the budget of the central government. Secondly, the donations that are made to this PM CARES Fund are exempted and can be counted against a company's corporate social responsibility obligations. So the contributions to this fund are tax exempted, and these contributions can be counted against a company's corporate social responsibility obligations. Again, it is also exempt from the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act 2010, and this fund accepts the foreign contributions also. Now, previously during the Kerala floods, the central government had refused foreign aid to deal with the Kerala flood disaster. So this is a new exception that has been made in the PM CARES Fund. Now, regarding the membership of this PM Cares Fund, you should note that it is headed or chaired by the Prime Minister of India. And the PM can nominate three eminent persons in relevant fields to board of trustees of this fund. Again, the Ministers of Defense, Home Affairs and Finance are the ex officio trustees of the PM Cares Fund. Now, as compared to this PM Cares Fund, the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund was first set up in 1948, and this was originally set up to accept public contributions for the assistance of partition refugees. Now, regarding its present role, you should note that it is now used to provide immediate relief to the families of those people who are killed in natural calamities. And also, it provides relief to the victims of major accidents, riots, and also provides medical expenses for acid attack victims and others. Now, this Prime Minister's National Relief Fund was initially managed by a committee which included the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, and also the Congress President and a representative of the Tata Trustees and an industry representative. However, this composition was changed in the year 1985. And in 1985, the entire management of this fund was handed over to the Prime Minister only, and who has the sole discretion for fund dispersal from this PM National Relief Fund. Now, presently, a joint secretary in the PMO administers the fund on an honorary basis. So, what we see is that there is familiarity in the role which is played by both these funds, that is the PM Cares Fund and the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund. Again, both these funds are at the disposal of the Prime Minister of India. And both these funds are aimed at tackling the issues related to natural disasters. However, this PM Cares has been specifically created to tackle the issue of COVID-19 pandemic. So after this, let us look at some of the concerns which have been raised regarding the PM Cares Fund. Now, first is that concerns have been raised against companies who are donating to this fund. Now, in this line, you might be knowing that Reliance Industries has made major contributions to the PM Cares Fund. However, this company has been accused of cutting the salaries of its own employees. Again, the railways have donated rupees 151 crores to this fund. However, they have not been able to provide free transport for destitute migrant workers. So these are some of the concerns that have been raised regarding the funding of PM Cares Fund. Again, the center has not responded to the queries on how much money is there in the PM Cares Fund and how and when it will be used for providing the relief to the affected parties due to this COVID-19 pandemic. Further, it is not clear whether this fund comes under the Right to Information Act or is it under the oversight of Comptroller and Auditor General of India. So this is again another serious concern regarding the functioning of the PM Cares Fund. Further, the PM Cares web page is opaque regarding the amount of money collected, names of donors, and the expenditure from the fund so far. And in contrast to this, the Prime Minister's National Relief Fund provides the annual donation and expenditure information. However, even this fund does not provide a detailed breakup of the contributors, etc. Further, the PM Cares Fund's trust deed is not available for public scrutiny. Further, the decision to allow uncapped corporate donations to the fund, which can be acted or counted as the CSR expenditure, have been opposed by various activists. And such a facility of considering the contributions to this fund as CSR expenditure is not available for funding to the PMNRF or the CM's Relief Fund. And this goes against a previous guideline which states that the CSR should not be used for funding the government schemes. So this move of considering the funding to the PM Cares Fund as CSR donations goes against the Government of India's own guidelines only. So some of the issues regarding the functioning of the PM Cares Fund is that it is opaque and non-transparent. Again, there are issues related to the accountability of this PM Cares Fund. Now, in this background, the Government of India has said that they will provide the details of the members who are funding to this PM Cares Fund and also the expenditure from this fund in due course of time. So these are few important issues related to the PM Cares Fund, and these can be important for us from the exam point of view. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, the next two articles that we will be discussing here are important from the preliminary examination point of view. And in this, we will look at one of the important locations related to this news article. And in the next news article, we will look at an important species. Now, this article on page number 8 is related to a issue that has started between India and Nepal after India and China inaugurated a new link road from India to the Kailash Mansarovar in China. Now, in this background, this new link road is being created through the Lipu Lake Pass, which lies at the tri-junction of India, Nepal, and China. And Nepal has objected that this new link road passes through its territory. However, this claim of Nepal has been refuted by the Ministry of External Affairs, and in its response, the MEA has said that this link road passes through the Pithoragarh district of Uttarakhand, which is a part of India's territory. And hence, this claim of Nepal is unreasonable. So, in this article, what is important for us from the preliminary examination point of view is the location of this Lipu Lake Pass. And this can be important for us from the exam point of view. So, in the Indian geography section, keep an eye on important locations that are in news and they can be asked in your preliminary examination. So, if you can see in this map, the new link road is being created from India to Nepal directly through this Lipu Lake Pass, and it lies at the tri-junction of India, Nepal, and China. And this new link road aims at linking India with the Kailash Mansarovar, which lies in the Tibet Autonomous Region of China. So, important thing to be noted is that it lies at the tri-junction of India, China, and Nepal. And to the south of this pass lies the Kalapani territory, which was recently claimed by Nepal, and this also became one of the important issues recently. So, in the preliminary examination, you can be asked the location of these important passes like the Lipu Lake Pass, the Nathula Pass, the Jalepla Pass, and the Bomdila Pass, etc. So, keep an eye on the important passes, and most of them have been covered in the NCERT of class 11, that is India Physical Environment or the Indian Geography NCERT. And make a list of this pass and be aware of their locations, and they can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Now, this article on page number 11 is related to a species which has been in news, and this is known as the Sal forest tortoise. And this has been in news in the context of a study which has been conducted regarding its habitat. So, this study has highlighted that this Sal forest tortoise is mainly found outside the protected areas, and hence the population of this species has been declining continuously. So, in this regard, it can be an important species for us from the preliminary examination point of view. And regarding this, you need to note that its geographical range includes the Southeast Asian nations and also some countries of South Asia. So, it includes Bangladesh, Bhutan, Cambodia, India, Malaysia, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, etc. And regarding its IUCN status, you should note that it is critically endangered. And in India, it is found in Uttarakhand and the northeastern states. So this is important information for us from preliminary examination point of view and should be kept in mind. So with this, we conclude today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.